Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for joining this webinar. We're going to be talking about planting the seed for the future and building resilient, inclusive financial services for women in a context where they work in the agriculture sector, but that sector is increasingly being impacted by the effects of climate change. Welcome again. My name is Rudo Kayombo. I am the Regional Director for Africa at BRAC International, and I have a splendid panel of speakers on this webinar. But why are we even talking about this issue? Because as we look towards 2030, where we are looking to measure the Sustainable Development Goals, we recognize that inclusive financial services, particularly for women, who are about 63% of those involved in the agriculture sector, need to move forward, and those serving them need to be conscious of their changing environment. We are wanting to see what could be an opportunistic future that we could achieve if we do all that we need to do to meet these women where they are, but in a changing environment that is impacting their livelihoods. The webinar will focus on imagining a positive future and thinking about the steps on how to get there. As climate change intensifies, its profound effects on global agriculture and food security have become increasingly evident. Smallholder farmers who produce much of the world's food are on the front line of climate change. In Africa alone, it is said that we have over 33 million smallholder farmers, and they produce the majority of the food. And their context, their environment is being battered by different impacts of climate change. Africa in particular and smallholder farmers produce very little of what is contributing to global warming, but they live with the impacts, the greatest impact, and they are least equipped to deal with the impacts of climate change. Imagine a future where women smallholder farmers are economically empowered and more resilient to the effects of climate change. What are the key challenges that exist today, and what needs to be done to realize that future? As I said, I'm Rudo Kayombo, and I work with BRAC International, and my distinguished panel of speakers are Lisa Schrader, Deputy Director of Women's Economic Empowerment at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. She'll say a little bit more about what they are doing in this area. And we've also got Venu, who is the director at 60 Decibels, and she will share about what they are doing to support the sector with information and insights. Upoma Hussein is an associate director for strategy at BRAC International, supporting the 6 microfinance institutions that BRAC International has. Well, let me come to the panelists. So the first question is, let's imagine together where we want to get to. But as we imagine where we want to get to, there are obvious frustrations. There are also things that excite you. Lisa, do you want to share a little bit about what frustrates you and what excites you?
Thank you so much, Rudo. It's such a pleasure to be with this group, speaking to this important topic. And as you mentioned, I'm coming from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, where I'm a Deputy Director for Women's Economic Empowerment. But before joining the foundation, I also spent about 8 years working in the agriculture and technology space, leading the Mercy Corps Agri-Food program and working across Africa and into Asia. So this is a topic that's very near and dear to my heart, and it's a great panel to discuss the questions on hand. So in terms of what I'm excited about, I have a strong background in technology. Our goal was always to advance technology because reaching smallholder farmers is so expensive. They're at the very last mile, first mile, last mile, depending on how you look at it. And the idea is that high touch models, like the model for BRAC, the model for 1 Acre Fund and other organizations that are doing such great work in reaching people in rural areas is so challenged by lack of infrastructure, by large distances, high risk, seasonality, and now climate change. So there are a lot of challenges that we have to surmount to get to this critical population, which is important for job creation, is important for food security. So there are a lot of challenges around us. But one thing that I would say is I have seen really important advances in technology, especially in the face of climate change. We're beginning to understand what type of lending really works for smallholder farmer. The type of microfinance that you would give in an urban environment is not the same as what you do for smallholder farmers. So I think we're starting to see better financial products get out into the market that have grace periods, that understand the seasonality of farmers, that especially I think digital on the back end can help us design financial products that work per crop. It's not a one size fits all type of environment. So the ability of financial systems to be more flexible and meet the needs of farmers, I think, is exciting. I think we're also seeing some data breakthroughs and organizations like the World Bank and the Kenyan government starting to digitize large numbers of farmers, 5-6 million farmers in Kenya, being digitized, being linked to data streams that can really inform credit and also begin to illuminate that women are being left behind. If you look at 63% women in agriculture, but in those systems, 30% of services go to women, you start to realize that we have to see this data in order to see how we reach women, whether women are being reached and whether they're not. But other things I'm excited about are the beginnings of the matching of science and financial services. So organizations like CGIAR that deeply understand how maize works in Tanzania and cotton works in Zambia. They're starting to bring the science together into platforms where it can benefit lenders who can better understand these sectors. The same holds true for insurance. The insurance industry has huge risks ahead of it, but I think they're also getting on top of digital data in ways that can contribute to financial services and underwrite a lot of the risk and help protect farmers and lenders. I also think that there are some interesting digital platform plays that are coming out, like Topia in Kenya, which reaches 2 million rural consumers with e-commerce, has recently, ventured its way into agriculture. And now they're one of the leading sellers of seeds and fertilizer and gumboots and rakes and irrigation. So, there are things that I think are really important, and bundling services with like irrigation and post-harvest loss can make a huge difference for women. So I think a lot to be excited about, but we have to take the digital divide very, very seriously. It's serious all across the world, but it's particularly serious for women in agriculture.
Thank you so much, Lisa. So there are ways in which we can make financial services more inclusive by riding on data, digital technology. Now, turning to you, Venu, there are things we can do to use digital technology, but you specialize, or your company specializes in actually listening to real accounts. What excites you in doing what you do and serving the sector by gathering all those insights? What excites you? What do you still find challenging?
Yeah, so I'll briefly introduce myself. My name is Venu Agarwal. I lead the agriculture practice at 60 Decibels, which is an impact measurement company. In case you didn't know, 60 decibels is the volume of human conversation. We help social businesses and their funders understand their performance and impact by listening directly to the end beneficiaries that these organizations are serving. And we collect data for this kind of impact and performance measurement through short phone conversations that are conducted with these end beneficiaries. So I think the technology and digitization aspect, Rudo, is both energizing and exciting for me as I look at data, and it also raises a cautionary tale. And that's what I want to talk to you about a little bit. We are seeing that farmers are seeking information from a wider variety of sources, both digital and non-digital. And I see that being a really important part of the future. And at the same time, we are seeing evidence that the human-to-human interaction that farmers have, either with peer farmers or with extension agents who are digitally enabled, is quite important in ensuring that those services are successfully used by farmers. And this is even more the case with women farmers than with male farmers. In fact, 60 Decibels has recently conducted surveys with 2,500 Kenyan farmers to understand this exact question of how digitization is working for them. These surveys were conducted in July and August after farmers had planted their crop for the ongoing long rain season, and farmers were asked to reflect on the planting phase. What we learned is that 18% of farmers are actually accessing information from some sort of a digital means, either through their mobile phone, primarily in the form of SMS or phone calls, but also through a variety of other ways of using their own phone to access information. And the rest of the farmers are using digitized agents. What is interesting about this 18% of users is 60%, or 3 in 5 of the users, use mainly their mobile phones, and 2 in 5 work with digitized agents. Now, at the face of it, it looks like using technology is going to be a more pervasive source of information, right? You can reach a lot more farmers. But when you ask the farmers about their experience of accessing information, their satisfaction with the information they got, challenges they experienced, you see that those farmers who worked with an agent are much more likely to be satisfied. They experience fewer challenges. And so it just reinforces the need for continuing that human touch when making digitization or digital means accessible to farmers. We haven't done the survey on financial inclusion yet because it's the beginning of the season. That's a survey much better done sort of towards the end. But that raises a cautionary tale, right? So access can be scaled quite easily and much more rapidly than was previously possible through technology. And that's exciting. At the same time, we need to make sure that women and specific farmer groups are not left behind, because human touch is going to be really important in making that digitization sustainable.
Thank you, Venu. So always retain the human touch, and that I think moves us well into Upoma, because BRAC's network of microfinance is right there in the communities with the consumer of services. So what excites you? How do you combine digital services and the human touch, interactive services? What's challenging, what's exciting in your work, Upoma? Say a little bit at the beginning of the range of things that you are doing for the network of BRAC Microfinance. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Rudolph. And it's really a great pleasure to join this conversation with such an esteemed group of all women panel. I am Upoma. I'm the Associate Director for Strategy at BRAC International Microfinance. And we are in 8 countries. So BRAC has microfinance operations in 8 countries, serving over 10 million people, mostly women. So over 90% of the clients that we serve are women living in poverty, living in hard-to-reach areas. So BRAC really has that network and human touch that you were talking about, Venu and Trudeau. And it's a great question about what makes us excited, and especially when we are faced with a crisis of such a scale. And as you know, Trudeau, both of us work for BRAC, and BRAC has over half a century of experience in dealing with climate events. Its origin, BRAC started as a relief effort after a devastating cyclone in Bangladesh in 1969. And throughout the 50 years of its history, BRAC has had countless lived experiences helping communities adapt to climate change. And I have been working at BRAC for the last 12 years at BRAC Microfinance, and, as I said, which mostly serves women. And I have lived in a few countries. What I am absolutely convinced of is that women, particularly poor women, are incredibly resilient. Time and again, they have proved us that, during Ebola, during our experience of COVID, all of these floods, drought, they have proved us that they can turn around. And I'm convinced that if we can get the right tools in front of them and they have the access, they can weather the climate threats as well. And that's what makes me optimistic. That's what excites me about this work. What frustrates me is how slow we are and how awfully short we are falling in creating access. I mean, I talked about BRAC reaching 10 million people, but still, that's nothing. Globally, still 1.4 billion people are unbanked, and most of them are women. These are usually the people who are most vulnerable to poverty and climate shocks. Women particularly, are more vulnerable, as we have seen in any crisis. There are existing inequalities, and when there are, in times of crisis, these inequalities multiply. So we have a huge task ahead of us to get these tools, get this funding, channels, training, everything that Venu talked about and Lisa talked about, to these women at scale and fast. We don't have time to lose, and we need to respond to the scale of the problem appropriately. So the future that I want to see is where this, rural woman who is already empowered and resilient, she can take control of her life and livelihood and has the right kind of tools, information, access to finance to adapt to the change brought by the climate events. And organizations like BRAC, as you rightly mentioned, Rudo, has the deep knowledge of the lives of these women and also have the distribution network. The human touch that you talked about, Venu, is very important, right? So we have the distribution networks to reach this woman at her place. And we have both a responsibility and the opportunity to create such access, particularly with the onset of new technological innovations like digital. And when we work with 60 decibels quite a lot on these approaches of reaching and listening to them more intently. So that's also what is looking forward to.
Thank you so much, Upoma. I just want to say to all the participants, please do post your questions in the chat, because we will have an opportunity to have the panel respond to those questions. But coming back to you, Venu, you talked a little bit about the multiple ways in which those smallholder farmers, women smallholder farmers, and men, of course, are receiving information. As we move into the future, what do you anticipate will be the ways of continuing to inform the consumers of the services that this sector is offering? How do we continue to inform them and also tap from their experiences so that it's a two-way communication? We are giving them information in ways that are accessible and that work for them. But how do we do that in the future in ways that are responding to the reality of their context?
Yeah, I think I covered the most important thing that that comes to mind in response to that question, Rudo, which is, I think we can provide information. Farmers are beginning to access information, especially including women farmers, through a variety of means, be it directly on their phone through SMS and phone calls, or be it through internet-enabled applications or just simple Google searches. They are beginning to ask questions of their extension worker colleagues or partners who are exposing them to information through digital means that they are using. For instance, videos or recommendations on their sort of tablets that they carry, or exposure to a variety of financial means. But across all of these, what is going to be really important, especially for women farmers, is that human touch. And that human touch needs to come at the right time. And that right time, based on the data that we have collected, tends to be at the beginning of that relationship being set up. So the farmer trusting a new innovation, especially a financial innovation that is going to impact their livelihood, they're much more likely to be receptive to something new if they have someone they can exchange information with, they can ask questions to. So sharing information can be done in a variety of means, but then being there at the other end to answer questions is going to be really important. And this comes up when farmers talk about challenges that they experience in using technology, because what they say is, someone came and gave us this information, or we were sent an SMS, but we had follow-up questions and we didn't know who to reach out to, or they never came back to ask us. And these kinds of things, we see much more coming from women farmers. So that combination of hybrid, if I can call it, or some people call it phygital sources of information, physical and digital, is going to be quite important as farmers, specifically women farmers or older farmers, access information going forward.
Okay, thank you. Now I want to come to you, Lisa. At the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, you're working with a number of countries, I think 7, and that means you are behind the work of a vast network. Beyond the particular groups that you're working with, I believe that the 3 of you who are on the panel already work together. How much more do we need to do that so that we can support each other in gathering information that is relevant to the impacts of climate change, while continuing to combine that with information that is being generated in the financial services sector? What more can the community, the sector do together so that we can really serve those at the front end better?
Yeah, that's a critical point, Rudo. I mean, we're out of time. I mean, we have to start collaborating, bringing all resources and our best game to the table. I mean, as I noted before, I work on the Women's Economic Empowerment team at the foundation. The focal group working on climate change is, of course, our agriculture team. But what we're also seeing is that our financial services team is beginning to collaborate into this space. Our digital public infrastructure work that looks at how information can flow better across government and private sector and reach down to the last mile so that women have digital ID, for example, and can leverage that for financial services. Inside the foundation, there are a lot of ways that we're collaborating. The Women's Economic Empowerment team is really looking at this from a livelihoods perspective and looking at diversified livelihoods for women that are climate resilient. So we're working across different kinds of partnerships to understand, yes, how we're raising data, yes, how we're driving increased levels of capital, but also, how should a woman protect herself through diversified climate smart livelihoods? Should she be just doing one crop, or should she also be looking at some livestock? Which types of livestock? Should she be involved in other types of economic activities? I think one thing that we see as a cross-cutting theme is women in groups, women in cooperatives, women in chamas, women in self-help groups, VSLAs. These are really important vehicles for women to be educated, to get that human touch that Venu is talking about, to build trust. So I think that network, that huge network across Africa of women in groups, whether they're formal or informal, is extremely important for us to be able to tap. Recognizing that it's the human to digital continuum, but certainly, we do think that data is going to be a critical enabler of this partnership that you're envisioning, Rudo, and that we have to address questions of data sharing. We've got to start thinking about the multidimensional aspects of climate impacts on women and on men. And someone in the chat I saw raised a really important question about social norms. They're huge around women and women's ability to participate in the economy and to learn and to be able to adapt. And so, you know, we to Poma's earlier question about really listening to our clients, one thing that we've seen with women is that a lot of times, you know, they would like to get that farmer advisory, or they'd like to take that loan, but they feel like they have to get spousal approval and often don't feel empowered to ask for it. So, you know, there are a lot of social norms that are constraining women that we have to address, because we don't have the time now to leave women behind.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lisa. Now, Upama, I want to come back to a comment you made right at the opening, the front end. You said women are resilient. But what we're hearing also is that the digital divide is still there. Climate change is coming and battering women in particular. Social norms take a long time to change. So how will your type of services need to change in order to enable the future that you envisage?
Thanks a lot for that question, Rulo, and I think it's very critical, as Lisa was mentioning earlier as well. I think to sort of answer how the work of financial inclusion or microfinance needs to respond to this, you know, at BRAC, we have always been very strong advocates that financial inclusion's role in empowering and building resilience of women. And if you're familiar with BRAC's work, it's a development organization, one of the largest in the world, and you know, runs many different programs focusing on women and girls, including microfinance. And we believe that the root causes of poverty equality are complex, so the solutions also need to be holistic. So from the very beginning, microfinance has been one of the critical tools, but it is one of the tools, but a very critical tool. So what we know already about the role of financial inclusion is that it plays a very important role in supporting financial resilience. And we have seen that in the surveys that we did with 60 decibels in the last few years, including the pandemic years, that, you know, women are more resilient when they do have access to savings and loans. And these are not even, you know, your green products. These are general savings, general loans, and insurance products, which we already know that they have financial resilience building ability. What we don't know perhaps is to the extent that it is also increasing resilience against climate shocks. And this we need to understand. And as Lisa and Venu, both of you were saying about the importance of data, and being attuned to our clients, is going to be important in understanding how these services actually build resilience against the changing climate landscapes as well. And the second thing that we know, and I spoke about it in the beginning, is that there still is a huge gap in financing rural women. Even with the digital tools that are coming, there's still a lot of women left behind. And we've seen this in the pilots. In the last few years, BRAC has been conducting sort of agri-finance pilots for smallholder farmers, mostly women, focusing mostly on women in several countries in Africa. And when we talk to these women, a full 83% of them said they have never had access to such a loan before. So the question that came in the chat about sort of how do we address women's different social norms, it's a very important one, because we see that there was never, you know, no one offered them a loan because it's too risky, too costly, too hard to reach. They don't have collateral, that they don't have the sort of social mobility. Or, you know, they are offered with products that are not suitable for them. So there is a huge opportunity for both organizations like ours, financial service providers, and organizations that provide capital to them, a huge opportunity to work on this. And particularly if we're intent on closing this gap, if we are listening to these women, if we are designing solutions with them, BRAC uses a human-centered design approach to understand their lives, their social norms, their barriers, and how to get solutions that actually work for them. We can close this gap. And third, what we know is that access to finance or just the loans is not going to be enough. And you said this, Rudo, like the challenges that these women are faced with the changing climate risk, as much as they're resilient, it's a huge challenge that they're facing. So what we have seen that across the pilots that we are doing is that women smallholders lack training on information, access to market, and these affect their livelihood, their returns. So building bundling services is going to be important. So not just loans, but also other financial and non-financial products. How do we scale insurance products, for example? How do we make sure that they have access to right kind of training on, and Lisa mentioned this, on diversifying their livelihood and making them more climate resilient. And it's hard for microfinance institutes alone to do it. So we need partnerships in this area. And it's often not easy to find the right partnership, the right model to scale these bundling services. However, as you said, given the context where we operate and the distribution networks that we already have, the high touch model and the nexus between high touch and digital, I think there's a huge opportunity to create platforms for these bundled services. As Lisa said, this is microfinance organization, savings group. These provide those platforms, and we are very optimistic that we can intentionally do this and get this. We will obviously be working with foundations like the Gates Foundation and in 60 decibel organizations like 60 decibels for data, but we can build the foundation and for these bundled services and really understand our clients, identify scaled models, approaches, and take the solutions to them.
Okay, thank you, Poma, for sharing from what you're learning is working and what more needs to be done. I think I want to come back to you, Lisa, because you talked about barriers, norms, and social barriers. And I know that Paul Gregory posted a question about that. And I know he's gotten a response, but just for the benefit of those who may not be looking at the chat, what more do we need to do as a sector to scale up impactful solutions that address those challenges like social norms that take so long to change? And also, how do we make sure that as we build impactful solutions, we can bring them to scale?
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Rudo. I really like Paul's question. And one thing that I know the foundation has looked at many times is property ownership in land, and it is tough. But another thing that I'll say that's quite interesting that I've seen from experience in Kenya and Nigeria is when lenders are open to allowing women to borrow to buy land. And I've seen this in the case of a couple of SACCOs and even women's groups. It's quite interesting how transformative that is for women. And we're talking about, half acre. I mean, micro loans. I mean, they're a bit bigger than micro, but they're micro loans. And I talked to some women who, got access to their first loan through a SACCO or a co-op or a women's group and took and bought a little bit of land, and why that made such a difference. And they said that, before they were, farming someone else's land, they didn't have control of their produce and their crop. Often it was taken from them by the landowners, and they were living at the barest of margins. When they were able to buy a little bit of their own land, they typically would then begin to build from that as a base, and they could control their income. They could make decisions about what happened on their farm, but they also talked about how this was a form of kind of social insurance for them. And they talked about how important it was for their children. If something happened to them, that land was their identity, and that was what they handed over as a legacy to their children to move them out of poverty. So if we talk about Rahul's question about root causes of poverty, I think that this question of land and women's access to land is really important. And microfinance institutions that I've seen are making that work for women. So yeah, but I mean, the questions of social norms are absolutely critical. And, I think there was a question earlier about collateral and what happens to a woman when she has no property or she has no collateral. We did talk with KCB Bank, and they told us that a huge percentage of women who were approved for loans then were not allowed to access the loans because they didn't have collateral. So what we're working on now with KCB is kind of marrying a traditional form of cash flow lending backed by collateral with their digital lending. KCB is very good at doing digital lending and finding what is that sweet spot in between where a woman gets good credit analysis from a loan officer, but her digital data trail is part of her identity and can replace collateral. And this is something where I think we've got to be smarter about how we bring in development finance institutions and loan guarantees, et cetera, behind not just the big commercial banks who usually get these loan guarantees, but also organizations like BRAC, that are really good at innovating and reaching low-income people. How do we support these institutions to take on new approaches where there is risk? Yes, there is risk, but we have to test. So I think that it's something where we need everyone in the financial system, from all the way from World Bank to the impact investors down to the commercial banks, and then all the way down to women's groups, cooperatives, MFIs. We all need to be supporting innovation and testing.
Okay, I will be coming back to you, Venu, with a specific question on what we know and what we don't know, based on what's already being learned by the sector. But just before we move from the point that Lisa has raised about scalable solutions, innovations, I want to come back to you, Upoma, and I want to know what we think has been learned over the years by BRAC International in terms of bringing solutions to scale, and what have we learned and what more can be done to not only make the innovation scalable, but also sustainable?
No, those are very good questions, Rudo. And I think at the beginning I said that BRAC believes that the poverty and equality are very complex. So the thinking around those solutions must also be complex, integrated, but the solution itself has to be simple enough that it can be scaled. And that's what we have been testing for our pilots for smallholder farmers loans as well. Their lives are very varied, their value chains are varied, their cash flows are very varied. So we need to, in our design, we have to be very mindful of all of that, plus the barriers that they face as women. But the solution itself must be scalable for an organization to scale it. So, thinking about the systems, the people, the training that goes into it, as well as the receptiveness of these women in a very sort of if we are given a complex set of choices versus simple solutions, you'll see that simple solutions are usually scalable. And we need to also think about how partnership models work. This is what we are testing, right? In the next phase, we are going to be testing several partnership models to see how we can actually scale bundle solution, and that is not going to be, there's a critical role that donor community and investors community has to play in making these pilots work. But we need to have the scale and sustainability in mind. So we need to find a solution that in the long run doesn't continuously depend on donor funding. So in the long run, it has to be scalable and sustainable. It's not, in a lot of these markets, exciting things are already happening, particularly in East Africa, Kenya, where we are right now. A lot of these innovations are already happening. A lot of the countries are still left behind. In countries like Sierra Leone, Liberia, where BRAC operates, there are very few options. So we need to be innovative. We need to find solutions that work in these contexts, but also really focus on the scale in mind, as you said.
Okay, thank you. I won't let you go just yet, Upoma. We've been talking a lot about smallholder farmers and the impact of climate change, but I've come to understand that apart from mitigation, any climate-related hazards, adaptation and building resilience, there's often the need to transition from being a smallholder farmer to looking at different livelihoods mechanism. And this coincides with a question that has been posted in the chat, which is, we're talking about solutions for smallholder farmers, but where women are trying to build their livelihoods outside farming, does the BRAC network also offer financial services to women who may not be in agriculture? Do you have a range of solutions so that even women who are building livelihoods that are not on farm can also be supported? Just a quick one. Do you have any financial services for those not in agriculture?
Yeah, no, thanks, Rudo, for that question. And it's very important one. It's a very critical one about adaptation and risk. I think most of the global effort, has been focusing on mitigation a lot, which is basically looking at how to reduce greenhouse gas emission and carbon emission. But we already know that the people that we are working for, these poor women in hard-to-reach areas, most vulnerable to climate change, are already in that situation. Their livelihoods are already affected, their lives are already affected, and there has to be a more conscious focus on resilience, adaptation, and transition. In terms of what sort of BRAC does or can do, we support women in small businesses, and both farming and off-farm activities. What we have seen a lot is that most smallholder women don't purely depend on agriculture. So they usually have, like, as I said in the beginning, they're very much resilient. So they already have a few sort of livelihood activities ongoing on the side. We need to invest in those. We need to continue to invest in diversifying their livelihood, making sure that they have the funding available, they have the tools like savings, etc., available when they need to make that transition. And don't forget the role of resilience building and adaptation as well. Like, transition obviously is going to be important, and microfinance can play a role, but I think more importantly, they can play a role in the resilience building and adaptation as our clients are going through this. I think there's a lot of role that donor community has to play in transition activities. It's something that we believe that it's just loans can't solve. It's one of those areas where we can't look for just market-based solutions. There has to be more commitment in supporting the transition of these women from the donor communities as well.
Okay, so Venu, we are gathering insights. We're understanding how women are actually experiencing the services of the financial services sector across different opportunities, whether it's village loans and saving associations, it's chamas that Lisa referred to that are common, I understand, in Kenya, or it's microfinance. Do we know all there is to know? Or is there still a lot more for us to learn? And what more do we need to do to gather more information that will help the service providers meet women where they are at in a fast-changing environment? What more do we need to learn, and what do we know enough?
I don't know if we can ever answer the question of do we know enough, because I don't know how much is enough in this case, but we know a lot. We know a lot both on the execution and on the research front, right? So there is the knowledge that Upoma just shared and all of the years of experience that BRAC has, that Lisa brings, and so many other organizations who are working on these topics. I think the characteristic that defines this knowledge is that these organizations know what works for them. And the knowledge tends to be hyper-local, or it works for the communities, that they are serving. And there's a need for this knowledge to be hyper-local because climate challenges, are hyper-local. How people cope and what means they have tend to be hyper-local. And I'm by no means saying that this kind of hyper-local research is not useful. What it does do, though, is for us to be able to step back as a sector and build a sector-wide evidence base. The hyperlocal research makes it a little bit hard to do that because you can't really compare one situation to another situation and what you're learning. What we need to do is find the lowest common denominator across all of these contexts, across all of these regions, all of these interventions. And that lowest common denominator is the household, whose lived experience we are trying to understand. And 60 decibels is striving really hard to root our approach to measuring climate resilience in the experience of that household. And so be it a financial inclusion service or an information service provider, right? If we just focus on the household, ask a standard set of questions that can help us understand the household's resilience capacity, their preparedness for a possible shock, and how they can cope. Hopefully, we will be able to create a body of knowledge that tells us end-to-end how different solutions are impacting that resilience. This isn't an attempt to say something is better than something else, but it is an attempt to understand where does a particular solution fit and how can it be complemented, like both Lisa and Upoma were talking about, with other bundled solutions, right? And what collectively works and doesn't work. So that kind of a nuanced picture can only come from standardization of how farmers and households' experience is understood, and then using those standard set of metrics in a way that can be applied across all interventions and is applied with discipline, and then the data is shared back. So we can see as a sector what we are learning and not learning.
Okay, so if I'm understanding you correctly, Venu, you're saying that while the very local experience of a particular woman, a particular household, might not be comparable in another location, there is a way in which we can gather enough of what is common so that when we offer what we are learning, it generally touches the lives of many of the people who are being impacted by climate change or who need to access financial services. We find ways of aggregating the data so that it actually is something that is usable across a broad spectrum. Am I getting you correctly that way?
Exactly.
Fantastic. Well, we are drawing to the end of our time, but there was one other question that I want us to try and speak to, and maybe I'll come to Lisa and Upoma on this one. So we're talking about microfinance. We're talking about Village and Loans Association as being available to help those dealing with the impacts of climate change. What are primarily humanitarian type of innovations that can be deployed when the hazard has happened? And what are humanitarian type of interventions from this financial inclusive services sector? What are appropriate humanitarian responses? Let me start with you, Lisa.
Oh, Rudo, thanks for this question. It's not my area of expertise, I'll have to say. But, I think it's a huge question that's on deck for, COP28 upcoming, is essentially how we deal with this question of humanitarian transfers when disasters have already struck. I know that there have been some recent challenges with cash transfer systems, under stress. How do we take cash transfer systems and make sure that they're properly targeted, that they reach the right people? This is really a challenge, and I think that we are going to have to see bigger partnerships between humanitarian assistance organizations and development institutions that reach these people and prepare new funds that are ready at a moment's notice. You don't have to wait to raise a lot of money for increasingly large numbers of climate climate hits. I will say that I know the insurance industry cannot. With the existing products that they have, the insurance industry is not the answer. The types of payouts that go to farmers when they are hit by a climate, by drought or flood, are often just enough to cover, the replacement cost of seeds, et cetera, but certainly not enough to cover the full cost of a lost crop. So that the insurance industry is not the direction, and we definitely need to be coming up with new models for humanitarian payments to effectively reach farmers who are being increasingly more impacted by climate shocks.
Okay, thank you. Upoma, as you explore any humanitarian interventions, maybe if you think back to when COVID hit, are there particular interventions that the BRAC network of microfinance had to employ to taking into account that their clients were all impacted by COVID? What is it that you were able to build into your services?
No, that's a very important question, because as we were discussing, just by having the distribution network in these communities, microfinance can play a very important role. Where there is a lot of importance around sort of humanitarian cash transfers and other rapid response when a disaster hits. Our experience in Ebola, during both Ebola and COVID, I think two things I'll say from BRAC's microfinance side. One was to make sure that we were never losing touch with our clients. So during both of these crises, we've retained all of our staff who were constantly in touch with our clients, even though they couldn't actually physically meet them. We've made sure that we were constantly keeping a tab on how their lives were doing and telling them that we haven't gone away, we haven't abandoned you. And the second one was to be ready to make sure that we can provide a liquidity when we are able to, as soon as we are able to, because these are crises, whether they're sort of economic crisis or climate crisis, ultimately results into an economic crisis for the kind of clients we support. So it's very important that at times like this, we don't tighten our belt. We don't say that, oh, it's now more risky to provide loans. We need to be able to be ready and provide more liquidity in the hands of these people so that they can turn around. And that's also the sort of experience we had. These people are very resilient. All they need is the support to turn around. So that's what BRAC did too. Like I have been very proud of the leadership that BRAC Microfinance did at the time of COVID-19, making sure that we are not being too risk-averse, but we are actually being ready to provide refinancing. We are ready to provide top-up loans. We are ready to make sure that the clients, even though we know they're in a worse shape, we are ready to provide the funding to them. So yeah, that's.
Well, our time has run out, but as we conclude, I do want to thank all our participants who have joined us. And I do want to ask one more question, and you have to answer this in 1 minute. What is the commitment that your organization is offering as we grapple with the impact of climate change and all its realities, but continuing to push boundaries to reach particularly smallholder farmers, women in hard-to-reach communities? What is the commitment that your organization is making? I will start with you, Lisa, then move on to Venu and come to Upoma last of all. Please, Lisa.
Thanks, Rudo. I wouldn't even presume to be able to comment on the full commitment of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation across all of our 26 program strategy teams. I do know that gender and climate change are absolutely top of mind for the foundation. What my team at Women's Economic Empowerment will be focusing on is supporting women's groups, and the vast majority of them are working in rural areas, linking them to markets, supporting diversified livelihood streams. We'll be collaborating very closely with our agriculture team at the intersection of climate and gender. I think that we're also very focused on social norms, on really identifying these social norms and figuring out and testing ways to address social norms. Just trying to think if there are others. We'll be working with financial institutions to help derive responsive products and services, including BRAC. Really looking forward to our partnership with BRAC to make their products kind of more responsive in a changing climate, leveraging data and digital tools. So looking forward to that with BRAC.
Well, thank you, Lisa, for making sure that the foundation continues to contribute not only to the particular microfinance institution, but to the sector. Let me come to you, Venu.
Yeah, I think it's a commitment that 60 Decibels has stood by for a long time, and we will continue to do it. We will not be assuming that the respondent group is homogeneous, and we will disaggregate all of our insights by gender to understand the experience of female farmers as being different from male farmers. And we'll continue to ensure that we are doing everything we can to get more women on the phone when we conduct interviews. We've done a reasonable job so far. Of all the 300,000 plus interviews we've conducted ever, 30% of our respondents are women. It's not 50%, so it's, there's a long way to go, but it's not 10%. And it comes from dedicated effort to get creative if you don't have the phone numbers of women themselves. We'll continue to do that.
Thank you so much, Venu. Keep talking to the women. And Upoma, I know that you're going to reach more as you open more microfinance institutions, but what more can you commit to the sector and to those we serve?
Oh, thanks, Rudo. And we've, at BRAC Microfinance, we had a lot of conversations recently about it. What should be our role, our commitment, our focus in this sort of climate vulnerable future, and based on our experience that we are already seeing, it's not a thing in the future. Our participants are already facing the climate risk. So we are committing to bring an intentional focus on investing in the resilience and adaptation for climate change, particularly for women and youth. And that bit is important, right? Focus on women and youth. And as I said earlier, there's a lot of focus on mitigation, but we need to really have a greater recognition that the risks of the lives and livelihoods of these women and youth that we serve are much higher than their impact on carbon emission, which is negligible. Let's just be honest, like the scale of things, it's negligible. So we need to focus on resilience, on adaptation, and we will do so by taking a learning approach. We are not assuming that we know already what will work and what will not work. So we will take a learning approach. We will understand the varied context and life realities, as Venu said, like it's very similar to that commitment of really this having a disaggregate understanding of their lives. And we will rapidly test solutions, find out what works, what doesn't, and really scale the ones that works and scale them fast. We need to work at a speed and scale that this crisis warrants. And we will continue to work with, funding and thought partners like the foundation. We're already working with them and data partners like 60 Decibels to make that happen. So yeah, that's our commitment.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you again to the participants, and thank you to this great panel. You are great partners making meaningful contributions, sustainable impact, and I know we are all committed to bringing it to scale. Thank you very much, and wishing you a pleasant week, really debating on the issues that affect the sector and those we serve. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Ruda.
Thank you.